Great. So welcome to the latest edition of our training from the Validation Hub. And today we'll be talking about validation using JOSM. So if you have some JOSM experience, great. And this will help you hopefully get a better idea of how we can validate work in OSM using JOSM. And if you are new to JOSM, we do have a couple of other trainings, both an introductory training and an advanced training using JOSM. So you can go back and find those on our YouTube channel. As I mentioned, this will be recorded, or is being recorded rather, and once we're all done here and the recording is available, you'll receive this recording along with the slides themselves in your inbox of your email address that you registered with. So we'll share all these materials with you. As we're going through the presentation today, please post any questions you have in the chat. A couple of us will be on the chat, sort of monitoring that and trying to answer your questions as we go. We'll also pause for questions throughout the presentation to see if anybody has any questions at that time. We're happy to go over things and review things as we go. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and the team I'm working with today. So my name is Richard Hinton, and I am at the George Washington University, and I'm the manager of the Validation Hub here for YouthMappers. And with me today are the four members of the Validation Hub, and I'll just ask them to quickly introduce themselves. So Ken, can you quickly introduce yourself?
My name is Ken. I'm a senior majoring in environmental studies and geography with a minor in GIS.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. Flora.
Hi, my name is Flora. I'm also a senior at the George Washington University, and I study geography and data science.
Fantastic. Sam.
Hi, I'm also a senior at the George Washington University, and I study geography and GIS.
And last but certainly not least, Nasa.
I am also a senior at the George Washington University, and I study environmental science.
Fantastic. Thank you. So today the training will be led by Ken and Sam. You'll hear from a lot more of them today as we go on. If for some reason you get kicked off this training, this Zoom call, don't worry, come right back in. We have Flora monitoring the waiting room, which will let you in right away as fast as she can. Okay. And again, as we go through the presentation, please keep yourself on mute and add any questions to the chat window, and we will get started. And if you can, it'll be great to hear where people are from. If you wouldn't mind putting in the chat window where you're calling in from today. It'd be great to know that. So with that, I will now pass the reins over to Ken and Sam for the duration of the presentation, but I'll be here to help answer questions. Thanks, guys. Take it away.
Okay, let's get started. Okay. So what is validation? Validation is the review of other people's work to ensure accuracy, which is which is normally being done by JOSM, and it is to ensure the tasks are being completed and all tasks being tagged accurately. So the validation process, so by the end of the process, it is also a common courtesy to ensure that you submit a feedback says, hey, thank you for mapping. And it is also important to provide instructions such as please ensure maps are being completed before submission, or please ensure buildings being squared or roads are being tagged properly. Okay. So why is validation important? So it is to ensure all data and tasks are complete accurately before it's submitted, because people often make mistakes. Every day. Validations. So validation flow. So it began with opening tasking managers, and we began with making sure the image has been aligned correctly, and using JOSM validation tools, and visual scan for completeness, and upload edits, which is a upwards key, which you could be find on the top left of your JOSM dashboard, and submit complete on tasking managers. Okay. So First of all, review instructions. Review instructions is very important. Just make sure what the task is for, some of a building, some of a roads. And it is also important to look for what image to use. I would recommend Bing because most of the time when I do validations, Bing image is pretty like clear and sometimes you do get images that are blurry, but if you do find Bing being blurry, I would also use Esri. You could find this dashboard when you go to tasking managers and hit on a task that's ready for validations and instruct. You can also see all the previous activities on histories. It includes people's comments about what they have done on their sections, and also you could try to change that, which includes everybody's edit. For example, a user Happy Mapper has added 6 rows to the section. Number 2, it is also important to align correct imagery because sometimes you could find the image being a little bit off. It could be shift towards left, right, north, or south, and this tool will help you to align the image correctly with roads and houses so you don't have to redraw the whole section again. So validation tool using JOSM, that was the checkmark I was talking about. So when you go to the task and you hit the check mark, so the system will do a check on any potential errors. That includes line crossing each other's, roads crossing with houses, building cross with each other's. And it is also important to ensure that you don't select on any buildings or roads while doing while running the check, because if you do so, the only thing the system will check is going to be the features that you select on. The check also tells you other errors, including unnamed roads and buildings, and sometimes we do tend to avoid that because it is normal that we leave like unnamed road alone. So visual scan assessment. So we do check that if there's any building that are missing. So if this, we can simply using the B key and it's going to help us draw a square quickly. And that is super beneficial because if you do draw a building using a line feature, you also have to go to the other box and enter that and tag as a building feature. The building key B will do that for you. And we also want to ensure if all the buildings are being tagged correctly. For example, building equals yes. And it is also important to ensure that all buildings are being squared, which could be done by using this Q key. And we also do want to make sure that buildings are not glued to each other. And if we do see buildings that glue to each other, simply using the G key to unglue each buildings. And if we do need to rotate buildings, the S key will get the job done. So road check. So we also want to make sure that roads, there are no overlapping roads, and sometimes if roads are intersected, we want to make sure that they're connected to each other. And we also want to make sure they're being tagged properly. Like we don't want our roads be tagged as a bridge, which I have seen before. Okay, so finish the task or send it back. So normally, if it's a super old task and sometimes we often just go ahead and get the issue resolved instead of sending it back to the mapper for more mapping.
All right, I'll be continuing this presentation, but I just want to ask, are there any questions right now from Ken's section? You can put them in the chat and I'll just continue on. So some common issues and errors that we find while validating are that buildings are not squared or they're tagged improperly. You can fix unsquared buildings by pressing the Q key as a shortcut, and you can find buildings that aren't squared by using search functions like nodes as for or more, and then you can also find buildings that are tagged improperly by using the search function as by searching area equals yes or something of that sort, and it will select all of the buildings that are selected as area, and then you can just do you can change them all at once to buildings equals yes. We also see that some nodes from buildings are attached to other buildings or roads. You can select the node and then press G to unglue the nodes and then separate both of the objects. We see that areas overlap with buildings. You can separate the objects by selecting them, or you can and just move them off from each other. Some roads are not connected to each other, and so you can just select the two end nodes of them and press C, which will combine them together. Another common issue that you will find when using the validation tool is that there are unnamed ways, and you usually can ignore this unless you but you can edit them if you have personal knowledge of the area and you know the names of the road, which would be helpful. And then we also see that roads and buildings and roads overlap, and you can just move the road or the building depending on if they are misaligned on the imagery. And then we also see some duplicate features, and I usually find that that's because it's on the edge of or a barrier of the task, and someone maps it on one task and doesn't see that the data popped up on the next task over. And so you have two people that map the same building. You can go to the next one, Ken. Ken? Some more common issues and errors are roads are incorrectly named. Sometimes people will mistakenly name roads road or add a description. You can find all of the named roads by using the search function, or using Control F for a map, or Command F, and type highway equals, and it will select all, or name, and it will select all that have all the roads that have names. Roads are joined to buildings. You can similar to that, you can just unglue the nodes that are connected and move them. And you probably will have to square the building and press Q if you do that. And then this is just like a useful tool that I've mentioned during this section of common issues, where you can use the JOSM search function to find areas where you need to fix the issues. Next slide. So before we finish validation, we want to make sure that the mapping is complete and it's completely accurate. So you want to so you're going to look at the task and see what it wants from the people mapping it. So some tasks just ask for buildings, some ask for buildings and roads. You can just so you just map out everything until you have until you've met the requirement for all the instructions. And you want to make sure that the features are correctly tagged. Before complete mapping, you want to make sure that there aren't any major errors you come across unrelated to the project, and you make sure that you fix them. So like if it just says roads or if it just says buildings and there's a road that was previously made and it's not aligned to the imagery, you can move that over just fine. And you can, if there are minor items missing, make sure you are adding them in while validating. So if someone missed a building, you don't want to just like a singular building, you don't want to just send it back to mapping. It's a very quick fix that you can do yourself. If you need to map most of the tasks, be sure to trace all missing items mentioned in the instructions. And then so for spatial accuracy, you just want to make sure that the features are aligned properly to the imagery. And do your best to not delete features. There's a way that we talk about in the advanced section, advanced JOSM section of replacing geometry. So if you want to make sure that you're not getting rid of the history of features, you can go back to the YouTube video for that one. Next one. Ken. So for validating the task, you want to trace missing features and fix existing issues. Before you upload your edits, you want to run the validation tool again, just to make sure there aren't any remaining issues, or while you're validating, you created some issues that you didn't notice, or you just missed. Provide a meaningful chain set comment and imagery used. So I usually just say validated such a certain amount of buildings and roads using Bing aerial imagery or Esri world imagery. And then you can, after successfully uploading all of the edits, you can return to the tasking manager and mark provide feedback and mark the task as complete. Okay, next one. So this is an alternative. So if the task was nowhere near completion and or was just not mapped well, you can say that this task was not mapped completely, and then you provide feedback to the mappers. You can say, great work so far. On the right, please do edit the top left area to map the missing buildings there. So if they missed like a complete section of the task, just send it back. And as long as it was like the earlier workflow, if it was like a priority task, you can fix it yourself. If it was not a priority task, you can send it back and leave it to the mappers. Yep. So like I said before, if you want to mark the task complete, you can just say, you can thank the mappers for their work and encourage them on stuff that they can do better and coming back to OSM to map further. Usually it would just be, hey, certain mapper, remember to square your buildings, but you did a great job. Thanks for mapping. Yeah. Next. Here are some message examples. Hi. So there's some general messages like, hi, at username, thank you for mapping, keep up the good work. So you just want to make sure that you're encouraging them to come back to OSM and map further. If you want to if they made some mistakes during their mapping, you can say, for squaring buildings, hi, username, thank you for mapping. Just a reminder to make sure you square your buildings either by using the Q key after you tag it, or by right-clicking on the building and clicking the square button. This will ensure the buildings are uniform and more accurate. So you just want to make sure that you're providing feedback, constructive feedback on how they mapped but make sure that you're doing it politely and encouraging them to improve. Sometimes mappers marked the task as complete and it was not complete. So you just want to remind them that you only want to select mark as complete if all of the features stated in the instructions have been traced. If not, select stop mapping. Hope to see you mapping again soon. So yeah, just correct their mistakes and then send it back to the mappers to map again soon and encourage them. And then here's an example for tagging features. You want to say, thanks for mapping. Make sure to tag all your features with all the appropriate tags stated in the instructions. Great work. Yeah. So next slide. Here are some useful plugins that we use so you want to go to find these plugins, you want to go to preferences, go to plugins and search. There's the 3 suggestions: to do, Mapathonner, and Mark Scene. And I'll demonstrate a couple of those in the upcoming demo. Next slide. Here are some resources. These are previous webinars that I mentioned that you can check out. There are some training documents that act as helpful side task in order to learn more about how to use JOSM to validate and just for yourself in your own mapping. And there's also a resource for keyboard shortcuts for JOSM at the bottom. And I think that's the last slide, or we can go to our demo now.
One thing I just wanted to mention, Ken, if you can actually back up to the validation messages slide. Yeah, right there. Nope. Forward one.
Back.
Forward. And yeah, right there. So actually, we have these examples here, but on our website, if you go to youthmappers.org and then under the projects tab and the validation link, you'll come to the validation page. At the bottom, you'll actually see there's a document there called validation messages. So if you're new to validating and you're wondering how to best frame the message back to the contributor, we have some examples here on the slide, obviously, but in the in that sort of under the resources bit of the validation messages document, we have a whole bunch of different scenarios of sample ones you can use. These are not set in stone. Obviously, you can write whatever you want, but here's we just give you a number of different examples to draw from, especially if you're new to validating, of how you can sort of make those comments, as Sam was saying, that are corrective but encouraging and inclusive, to make sure we want to make sure people come back to map again and again, and to compliment them on the work they are doing. So just wanted to point that out, that we do actually have a document on the website that can help you sort of navigate that part of it. All right, I'll be quiet. Sam, go ahead and start with the demo.
Wait 1 second. So I'm gonna start by sharing the tasking manager. So this tasking manager, it just asking to map just the buildings in this area, and it asks for imagery of Maxar satellite imagery, but that's not really an option anymore on JOSM or on OpenStreetMaps. So we're going to be using Bing aerial imagery. And so those are just like this few instructions that this task has. And I'll move to JOSM now. So here we are in this square. I've already run the validation, but I'll just select a building. And then, so here I just ran the validation tool, which is like one of the first things you want to do. You also want to check that the imagery is all correct, and for the imagery for this task looks well with all of the data and this task. It looks well aligned, and so we can move to the validation tool. And so when you run the validation tool without anything selected, it will pop up with all of the warnings and errors that come up. So we can start with looking at what like a crossing building and highway would look like and how we would want to fix that. So over here, I just controlled and zoomed to problem, and we can see that this road was moved to be over these two buildings. So we just want to move the road and make sure that it's not overlapping on the buildings. You can also check make sure that they're squared and that they're properly aligned to the buildings. And so now I'll validate the tool again, and those two pop-ups are now gone, but there's another one and we can move. And so this one, it looks like someone forgot to square their building, and the outlier was over the road. So we can just move the building back, square it, make sure it's aligned. And so now we've gotten rid of all of the buildings or overlapping with the highway. And then we have another error message with the node connects highway and building. So we can zoom to that problem. So we can see that this node is connected to the highway. So we can unglue the node, and then we want to move the buildings node away and separate them. And then we can just make sure to square the building afterwards, just so everything's correct. And then we can move over to overlapping buildings. It looks like this building was duplicated, and so we can just move this and make sure that everything's right. So it looks like this, there's not really a building in the area that wasn't mapped, so it looks like this was just a duplicate. So we can just delete this building and keep this more accurate building. And then now, wait one sec. Sorry. And there's one more. It looks like these two buildings just slightly overlap. And so we just fix that by using like a cutting tool that will shorten the building to its right size, as you can see here. And so, and that was with a shortcut with X, which was part of the buildings tool. And so now we can see that the only validation that we would need or would prefer are like unnamed ways, except I don't really have any knowledge about these roads, so I don't know what they're named, or so I'll just leave that to be mapped in the future or tagged in the future. So now we can just, now that we fixed all of the validation problems, we can just look through the whole task to make sure that everything's correct, that we didn't miss any major problems that wasn't caught by the validation result, or maybe there's like some buildings missed. And this is where the mark scene viewer, which you can see in the bottom right, is a big helper with, because it will show where you've looked over a task and where you still need. So it looks like on my mark scene viewer, I need to look over on the right hand side and find and just make sure that all of this is correct. That let's just move that road to make sure that it's slightly correct. And it looks like maybe something down here. Looks like all of these buildings are well mapped. They're tagged properly as buildings equals yes, which I'll do a demonstration. So I've just opened up the search window. You can use search buildings equals yes, and you can select or add to selection, and it will select all of the buildings or all building areas that are buildings equals yes.
Sam, we couldn't see the search window pop up. We only had
Really?
your Java editor window, that's all.
I don't know how to fix that on
You
Zoom.
stop sharing and then share again, but share the entire screen. Any pop-ups you have come up, which should be seen.
All right. Share entire screen. Is that working?
Yep, now we can see it.
All right, so now I'll do buildings equal UCS, and it looks like all of those buildings were selected, so we can make sure that we know that all of these buildings are tagged properly. Oh wait, sorry. Mistake. Oh, and then I can also demonstrate our Mapathonner tool. So our Mapathonner tool, it will show up on the top window. And you can use it to create buildings, or you can use it to select non orthogonal buildings, which will typically be unsquared, or like buildings with more than 4 nodes, and with like, and then you can also select duplicate buildings, which did not wield any results for this task. We can do select non-orthogonal. It selects a few buildings, and you can see that this task only has 4 nodes, but it's not really it's not really squared properly, as well with these over here. Oh, I just lost it, so let me. So we can just square these buildings, which is very helpful from the Mapathonner tool. Because we just want to make sure everything's correctly aligned. And then let's see if there's any more. Oh, this one. Are these tools? Yes, this one's not squared correctly. And so, yeah, those were all of the plugins I wanted to show. So I think that's it for this demo. Does anyone have any questions or want to see anything else?
Actually, can you follow through and go through the, well, 2 things. Before we leave this, we'll fix all the issues and then upload it. So we can
Oh yeah,
this one.
sorry.
But before that, did you mention Mark Scene?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. There were a couple of questions. There was a question there about using the search tool. Could you just demo the search tool again once more?
Yeah.
To identify all the buildings?
So here's the search tool. You can use a typical search function is buildings equals yes. You can also do I think it's nodes for, I don't quite remember. But if you do buildings equals yes, you can, it will, and add it to selection, it will select all of the buildings that, or all of the areas that are tagged as that. You can also, what are other functions? You can look up at like type of way, which, oh wait, sorry. What happened? Oh wait, that's, sorry. I've just lost my chain of thought.
That should do it. I mean, the question was
Okay.
about how to select all the buildings, but as you see, the search tool can be very, very powerful, and there's a whole wiki on that where you can go in and find different things by their name, the various key value pairings, very key values of value, key items or value items, and you can actually select for those. So it's a pretty handy tool if you're looking to do a bunch of editing and find particular features. So good question. And yes, I'll be quiet here, Sam, so you can sort of finish the workflow with this particular task.
All right. So we can just now upload all of our data. It will bring up this message if there's suspicious data found, but it's just 3 unnamed ways that I've edited. So now we can just continue to upload, and I'll just say validated buildings and roads using Bing aerial imagery. Yep. And it will pop up with all of the hashtags related to the project, and then you can just upload the changes. And so now that I think that this task is all completely mapped, I can go to the tasking window, and I can go to, is this completion? Is this task well mapped? Yes. And then I can provide a comment to all of the mappers. So if you just create write down an @ it will pop up with all of the mappers. You can and then you will just provide a little message saying great work mapping. And as we saw in this task, there were a couple buildings not squared, so we just want to say make sure that you square your buildings by using the Q key, and then you can just say please map again, or I hope you come back and map. Let's just say that. And then you can, so you've just written out a comment, which is both constructive and encouraging. And then you can, by submitting the task, it will send out an email to all of these mappers, and it will, and then we can be done with our little demo. Are there any questions that I missed?
Yep, I see a hand up there. Go ahead and either type it in the chat or take yourself off mute if you have a question.
Okay, that's could be heard. Uh, test. Hello.
Hello, yep, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Yabes, and I am from UNJ chapters in Jakarta. I have a question.
Yep.
Do we always need to square the buildings when we map the uh, imagery? Because there are some cases like the imagery is so blurry, so the shape isn't isn't really square. Do we always need to square it, or we can just adjust the shape of buildings based on what shape on it on the imagery?
Great question. You don't always have to square it because not all buildings are square. There are some buildings that are round, and some buildings that are like have diagonals in there. So you can just adjust the like nodes to make sure that they're all at the correct spot, but like just make sure that all of the corners are, if a building is square, you just want to make sure that it's square.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, most buildings in the world really are do have squared corners. That's where I always add our students to sort of square the corner of the building, square the corner of your buildings, and by and large, you do want to. One thing to keep in mind, because there are some buildings that are, as Sam just said, may have a diagonal or something when it was created. But be mindful that when you're looking at satellite imagery, sometimes the imagery, the satellite isn't directly overhead and is looking at the imagery on the side, so sort of a side angle. That can make the rooftops look like they're not square, right? So if you know for a fact you have knowledge of that area and you know that, oh, that building actually is more like a trapezoid, cool, draw it as a trapezoid, because what we want are the features we create in OSM to reflect what the actual building, what the actual features on the ground look like, as close as we can get them. And by and large, the buildings are going to have squared corners. I know one of the things we get here, a lot of buildings that maybe have like a pitched roof. If it's taken from a certain angle, it looks like instead of being a rectangle or a square, it has a sort of peak at one end. So we know that that's not actually the case. It's actually a rectangular or squared roof, but because of the angle of the imagery, you can sort of see that peaked roof as you're looking at it from the side or from that angle. So it's sort of being cognizant of what angle are we looking at these buildings? Because if you can see the side of the building clearly, then obviously it's sort of looking at it from the side as opposed to straight down. So the general rule of thumb is square the corners unless it's obviously not square, in which case, yeah, they are round. Sometimes there are diagonals. I know here in the US, there are some what they call flat iron buildings where there's a very sharp angle, very obvious angle. So it needs to follow what actually happens on the ground as best as we can do. Are there any other questions? That was a great question, by the way. Great question. Any other questions?
One more question, can I?
Yep, go ahead.
Sometimes there is a case where it is so hard to differentiate either it is buildings with concrete with white paint on it and a regular built area, but it isn't a building. What's the best tip to map on it? And not also, it is so hard to differentiate with the concrete made building, but it is sometimes there is buildings with the top of roof still made with asbestos. So it is in some cases it's very hard to differentiate either it's building buildings uh with asbestos or white concrete roof, or it's not a building, just a built area. What's the best tips to differentiate that kind of buildings?
That's another good question, and that's a problem, yeah, a lot of mappers run into, because you look at something, you know something is there, or you should think something is there, but you can't exactly clearly define what that is. We tend to tell our mappers to be more conservative and only map features that you can definitely tell. And sometimes you can tell there's a part of a building there, but it's hard to understand how far it goes or where it ends. Do your best estimate to figure out where that is. But something that can help you as well is you look at different imagery, because they'll be taken at different years, different times of the year. Sometimes that will help with identifying what the feature is, the shape of that feature. Be mindful that when you're working through the tasking manager, you'll want to make sure you align your features with whatever imagery is requested by that project manager. All right, so they're requesting Bing or Esri or something. Make sure you use it to align your features, but perhaps for that area, another imagery is a little clearer. So what I've done in the past is use the clear imagery to trace my feature, so I know I have the right shape. And then I use the newer imagery, perhaps isn't as clear, and then move it to the appropriate location, so it's spatially accurate as well. But in general, we say be conservative, especially if you don't know the area. Like a lot of our students will do remote mapping, so we're not in the country, right in the neighborhood where we're mapping. Be conservative, and then somebody who's familiar with that area hopefully will come in later and make those corrections and make sure the map is more accurate. You can also, when you submit your edits, if there are a lot of areas, a lot of edits that you've created that perhaps you weren't 100% sure on, you can leave a comment when you do your change set comment, and when you're finishing out your, in particular, finishing out your task in the tasking manager. Is this area well mapped? You can say no, and then leave a comment saying there are several areas where the imagery wasn't clear, and I wasn't sure if the building was mapped entirely correctly or not. I mean, you can leave a little comment so for the next user to see for that particular task. So there are definitely ways sort of to work around this, but generally be more conservative and map what you can clearly see. And if there's a bunch of things you can't, then by all means, leave a comment in the tasking manager when you close out that particular task. And so other people working on it be able to see that. Another great question. We have a few minutes left here. Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, we had one in the chat actually. Someone had wondered how often the satellite imagery is updated, especially for areas with changing buildings and structures. Also, then for poor imagery quality, how do you tackle that?
That is a great question, and I don't know, to be honest, how often the imagery is updated in particular. That depends on, I think, a number of factors of when Bing or Esri or whomever get those imagery from those image providers, and then the licensing is in place that they can make it available. And, of course, you have to get the new imagery, stitch it together and make those mosaics and deliver it and put it on the server so it can be delivered for us to use. I really don't know. And it's also hard to figure out oftentimes which imagery is more recent. So oftentimes I will, if I'm using working in JOSM, I will put on multiple layers and I'll turn them on and off to see which one has sort of more buildings. If something was, say, forested or had a number of trees there, and then another imagery, there's a bunch of buildings there, then obviously that one would be the more recent one, because there's no longer a forest or a number of trees there. So you have to using a lot of those sort of visual clues to sort of help you sort of figure out what the most recent one would be. When it comes to like resolution and clearness and clarity of the image, yeah, the most recent one may not be with the highest clarity or the highest resolution. So again, if the project is requesting the most recent imagery or what they feel is the most recent imagery for their area, but in areas it may not be that clear, I will then use another imagery source, maybe that is more clear, and use that to define the building shape, and then go back to the new one and then move my building or my road or whatever to match. So we have the correct shape. We also have the correct spatial relationship with the other features that I'm creating according to the imagery. So it's a bit of subtlety and a bit of nuance to going back and forth between different imageries and identifying which features are to be traced how and to be where and where those features are traced. It's a bit of a nuance, and only thing that really helps you with that is experience and just simply mapping. Generally, if you are new to mapping or doing lots of mapping, and you can always find there's lots of areas in the world that have good imagery that aren't mapped. Even like here in the United States, generally the imagery is pretty good in a lot of places, but there are a lot of small towns and stuff where they are not mapped. And if you wanted, especially as a beginner, to come to some of these locations, even my like hometown in Canada, the imagery is really good, but a lot of areas not mapped. So they have a lot of individual sort of buildings and structures that are easy to identify. So it's a great way to sort of practice your mapping and getting your experience doing that kind of mapping. But find a community anywhere you want, right? And it's just, I find finding individual features easier to map, especially as a new mapper. And then as you get more comfortable with it, move to more urban areas. And then because some areas get very, very dense and become more difficult, more challenging. So you need more of an experienced eye to actually map those accurately. Got about 4 minutes or so according to my clock. Any other questions? These are great questions, by the way. Great questions. Yes, Emmanuel.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So my question is on for some areas that are RS, it is like for rural areas and that have some roads that are not kind of standard roads. How do you know that you have mapped all the available roads? Like for rural areas that there are some little roads that maybe that are not, some of them are residential and some little roads by the with little tracks with graphics by the side. So how are you able to, how can you be sure that you've mapped all these roads?
Right, I didn't quite catch everything because your sound from me was coming in a little muffled, and I also have people in the walkway opening in the hallway behind me opening and closing doors. So I couldn't quite catch it all, but it was like, how can you know if you're mapping captured all the buildings there? Was that the question? Yeah, Emmanuel, if you can briefly sort of type your question in the chat, that might be a little easier because again, I have a lot of background noises in the office going on here, and your audio is coming in a little bit muffled, so it's kind of difficult to discern exactly what you were saying. Just a reminder as well that this is all being recorded. So anybody that registered for this training will get a copy of the recording once we have that up on our YouTube channel, as well as the slides that we used today. Okay, so we'll have that ready for you probably, hopefully next week. We can get that out to you, to all of you guys. Also, I do see a few familiar names on here from our YouthMappers network, so it's so good to have you guys here today, and glad you're able to make it. It's always good to see some of our YouthMappers coming back for board training and checking in on what we're doing. We appreciate that. Okay, for Emmanuel. Okay, for rural areas, how are you sure you have mapped all the roads considering a lot of random tracks around? Oh, yeah. That's a good question as well, and that's a hard one to decide. Especially with remote mapping. It really depends on the I guess, well, for the particular project, if you're working on a tasking manager, hopefully the project instructions are clear enough to clearly identify what constitutes the roads versus tracks versus path and what they actually want you to map. A well-articulated project should have that clearly identified so you can sort of identify those roads. Other than that, if you are not familiar with the area and you're sort of, it's going to be a best guess based on what other people have mapped currently in that area and what you're looking to map, if it's sort of primary roads or tertiary roads or local roads or paths. do your best to make sure the ones that look visually the same are traced the same manner and tagged in the same manner. Ultimately, the people that live there should make a final determination on what a particular road's use is and then how that can be tagged appropriately according to the OSM wiki. But that is a difficult one, especially for remote mappers. And again, if it's coming from a tasking manager, then hopefully the tasking manager project has very well articulated instructions, including maybe pictures for the local area, like this is considered a path, this is considered a residential road, or something like this. So they'll have that well articulated. But that's you know, paths versus tracks versus residential. I mean, it can be different to a lot of people. So hopefully you can match what's already in OSM. But if there's nothing there, then my suggestion would be as consistent as you can with the type of roads you're mapping and how you're tagging them. So at least all those are mapped together and mapped in the same manner. All right, great questions, guys. Great questions. We are at the hour. Actually, we're just about a minute over. So I'm going to close this down right now. But thank you very, very much, everybody, for your attention and for your fantastic questions. Again, this training will be available via our YouTube channel. Hopefully, we'll get this uploaded by next week. And as always, we'll be here, and over the summer, over the next semester, I'll be offering more trainings again, starting with JOSM, and then an advanced JOSM, and then moving on to validation as well. Always come back and join another training if you like. We'd love to have you as well. Access our trainings and our videos on our YouTube channel. All right, so thanks very much for everybody. Great to see you guys. And especially the names that I'm seeing that are familiar. So awesome that you guys are back again, and enjoy having you. Thank you to Sam and Ken and to Flora and Naza for the team here. And everybody have a wonderful rest of the month. And hopefully we'll see some of you guys in the new year in 2025. All right. Take care, everybody.